Zara scrubbed the floors of that Atlanta mansion until her hands bled and her knees turned blue. Against the cold marble, she endured the mistress's smirk and her mother-in-law's satisfied silence, playing the part of the broken servant perfectly. But every drop of sweat that hit those floors was an investment. They didn't know that every wall she cleaned, every room she polished, was already registered in her name. She wasn't scrubbing a house, she was reclaiming an empire. There is a terrifying kind of silence that fills a woman when she finally stops crying and starts calculating. It's the silence of a decision made so deep in the soul that words can no longer reach it. The night Zara finally dropped the mop, she didn't just stand up, she stood over them. Her husband thought he owned the world, never realizing he was just a tenant in a nightmare she had spent years designing. She didn't just take back her keys, she took back his oxygen. Hello friends, welcome to Black Bite Stories. Before we begin today's story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love hearing from our global family. The house sat behind iron gates in a neighborhood where wealth announced itself in every detail. 12 rooms, marble floors, a chandelier in the grand foyer that threw light across every surface like it had something to prove. Zara had lived inside those walls for 3 years. 3 years of keeping the peace, folding herself into whatever shape the room required, making herself small enough to survive the space they allowed her. She had never shouted in that house. Not once. That was not weakness. That was strategy. That was a woman waiting for the right moment. And the moment was almost here. It was a Thursday evening when everything finally broke open. Zara was coming through the kitchen door, carrying a tray of glasses, when her mother-in-law Claudette walked into the living room holding a mop at arm's length. Claudette was a tall woman with sharp edges and a way of occupying space that made other people feel like visitors. She had never warmed to Zara. She had never tried to pretend otherwise. She crossed the room without hesitation and dropped the mop at Zara's feet like a statement, like a verdict, like something long decided and finally delivered aloud. "Since you're going to be in this house," Claudette said, her voice carrying to every corner of that room, "at least make yourself useful. Renee wants the east wing cleaned before dinner." Nobody flinched. Her husband Marcus sat in the armchair closest to the window, phone in his hand, and he did not look up. His brother Darius was on the sofa. His sister Kazia sat beside him, scrolling, unbothered. 2 cousins occupied the chairs near the far wall, and they looked at the floor the way people look at the floor when they have already decided not to involve themselves. The room was full, and the room was silent, and Zara stood in the middle of it holding a tray of glasses while a mop lay at her feet. She looked at Marcus. He was already typing something, phone angled deliberately away from her. She set the tray down on the side table. She picked up the mop. She said nothing at all. That nothing was the loudest thing in the room. Renee appeared at the top of the staircase 10 minutes later, draped in a silk robe the color of cream, looking down at the floor below her like a woman surveying what she had already decided was hers. Renee had moved into the guest suite 6 weeks ago. In those 6 weeks, she had gradually stopped behaving like a guest. She had begun leaving her things on surfaces. She had begun giving the housekeeper her preferences for breakfast. She had started walking through rooms the way people walk through rooms they own. Now she stood at the top of that staircase and looked down at Zara the way someone looks at help they are not quite satisfied with. "Start with the bathroom," Renee said, adjusting the robe at her shoulder, "and dry the floors with the good towels afterward. I don't like streaks." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and disappeared back into the suite, pulling the door shut behind her. And from somewhere near the sofa, Darius laughed. Small. Mean. The kind of laugh that was never really about humor. Kezia smiled at her phone like she had just read something entertaining. Zara moved to the east wing and got to work. She was on her knees in the hallway, arm extended, scrubbing the grout along the baseboard, when she heard footsteps coming toward her from the far end of the corridor. Heavy footsteps, familiar ones. She looked up. It was Marcus. Fresh shirt, to glasses of something in his hands, something she could smell from where she knelt on the floor. He reached the spot where she was working and he did not stop. He did not slow down. He stepped over her outstretched arm the way you step over something left in the hallway. Without thought, without acknowledgement, without the smallest hesitation. He knocked twice on Renee's door. It opened. He went inside. The door closed. Zara looked at that closed door for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the baseboard and kept cleaning. It was in the last room she cleaned, a small sitting room off the east corridor. That her phone buzzed against her hip inside her apron pocket. She finished the corner she was working on before she pulled it out. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. It read simply, "Miss Zara, my name is Mr. Elias Thornton. I am the estate attorney for your father, Cornelius. Please contact us at your earliest convenience regarding a matter of significant urgency." She read it twice. She silenced the phone. She put it back in her pocket. She went back to work. 4 hours total. Hands raw from the cleaning solution. Knees aching from the marble. She wrung the mop one final time, leaned it against the wall in the utility closet, removed her gloves, and walked to the small back bedroom they had moved her into 3 weeks ago, when Renee took over the master suite. She sat on the edge of the small bed and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Against her chest rested a thin gold pendant shaped like a key, worn every day for the past 15 years without a single exception. She reached up and held it between the fingers. Her face was still. Her eyes were dry. She was already somewhere they could not follow. To understand what Zara was made of, you had to go back to Houston. You had to go back to a modest house on a clean street where a broad-shouldered, unhurried man named Cornelius raised his only daughter with the kind of patience that comes from understanding exactly how long good things take. Cornelius was not a man who wasted words. When he spoke, the words were precise, deliberate, chosen the way a builder chooses which piece goes where. He had built his first commercial property, with cash saved over 11 years of working before sunrise and after sundown. He never borrowed what he could not cover. He never built faster than the foundation could hold. He taught Zara to read contracts before she was 10 years old, not because he expected her to follow him into real estate, but because he believed every black woman should know exactly what ground she was standing on, because the world would not always tell her. He had one saying he returned to more than any other. He said it at breakfast and on drives and on the back porch in the evenings when the two of them sat in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Never let a room full of noise convince you that you have nothing to say. He said it the way people repeat the truest things, not to teach, but to remind. She heard it so many times it became something she carried below thought, the way people carry their own names. The morning she left for college, he stood at the front door in his good shirt and held out a small jewelry box. Inside was the pendant gold, shaped like a key, thin and clean and just heavy enough to feel real against the skin. He clasped it around her neck himself, fingers steady, and then he stepped back and looked at her for a long moment. "This is not jewelry, baby girl," he said quietly. "This is a reminder. Every door you will ever need, you already hold the key." She had worn it every day since. Through college, through the years she built her career in community development, raising funds for affordable housing initiatives across 3 states. Through the evening, she met Marcus at a fundraiser gala. Through the wedding. Through 3 years of a marriage that had slowly become something unrecognizable, something she had stayed inside not from fear, but from a kind of patient faith that things could still become what they were supposed to be. Cornelius had never told her the full scale of what he was building. She knew he owned properties. She knew he was respected in real estate circles across multiple cities. But he spoke of his work the way certain kinds of wealthy black men speak about money. Not at all. He lived the same way he always had. Same house, same car. Same porch in the evenings. He gave generously and quietly and never made a production of any of it. He had taught Zara, without ever saying it directly, that real wealth does not perform. It simply is. When she brought Marcus to Houston to meet her father for the first time, Cornelius was polite and measured. He shook Marcus's hand. He asked him questions. He listened to the answers with that same unhurried attention he gave everything. But later, when Marcus had gone to bed and it was just the two of them on the porch in the evening air, Cornelius sat for a while without speaking. Then he said simply, "You're a gentlewoman, Zara. Make sure whoever stands beside you understands what that's worth." She took it as a blessing. It was a warning. She only understood that much later. The week after the wedding, while Zara and Marcus were still on their honeymoon, Cornelius drove to his attorney's office and updated his will. He transferred the deed to the Atlanta mansion directly into Zara's name as a protective gift. He restructured the full inheritance so that upon his passing, every asset would go directly and solely to his daughter. 43 commercial properties, 11 residential complexes, development rights across 6 states, multiple financial accounts. The total appraised value of the estate, $28 billion. He told Mr. Thornton simply, in the quiet voice he used for everything important, "She may not need it right away, but she will know exactly what to do with it when the time comes." He signed every page in his neat, deliberate hand. Then he drove home and sat on his porch and said nothing about it to anyone. Marcus had not always been this man. In the beginning, there had been something real between them, bright and promising and full of the particular optimism of two people choosing each other. But he had never developed the patience to understand Zara's quietness. Her stillness unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. And Claudette had been working on him for the better part of a year with surgical precision, planting ideas the way someone plants weeds, without drawing attention to the planting, just waiting for the growth. She told him that Zara's silence was secrecy, that her gentleness was detachment, that a woman who never raised her voice had decided she was above the family she had married into. She said it in private moments and over long phone calls and over dinners where Zara was always somehow across the room. Jakari heard her out. He began to nod. He began to believe. Renee had come into the picture through a mutual colleague and had stayed through calculation. She studied what Marcus needed to hear, and she delivered it with precision. She told him that Zara's gentleness was passive, that her patience was contempt dressed up as dignity, that a woman who truly loved her husband would fight, would make noise, would make her presence undeniable. She made Marcus feel as though staying with Zara was a quiet form of settling, and she made herself feel like the correction. Marcus believed it the way a man believes things when he needs the believing to be true. The dinner table conversation happened on a Wednesday evening. Marcus sat at the head of the table and waited until everyone was eating before he spoke, his voice carrying the ease of a man who had already decided and simply needed to announce. He said that Renee would be moving into the master bedroom going forward. He said Zara would take the smaller room near the utility area in the east wing. He did not meet Zara's eyes once. The table received it the way a room receives news it has already been prepared for. Claudette took a slow sip of wine. Darius gave a small nod. Kezia looked at her plate. Zara set down her fork. She looked at Marcus across the length of the table. He was already looking away. She sat very still for a moment, the pendant cool against her chest. Then she picked up her plate, walked to the kitchen, set it down gently in the sink, and stood at the window in the quiet dark behind the closed door. She let out one long breath, and she allowed herself, alone for the first time in hours, one single tear. One. And then she was done. The second call from Mr. Thornton came for days after the dinner table announcement. This time Zara answered. She was in the utility room, door pulled shut, voice barely above a murmur. Thornton's voice was careful, measured, and practiced in delivering significant information to people in difficult circumstances. He told her that her father Cornelius had passed away quietly at home 6 days prior. He told her that as the sole heir to the Cornelius estate, she was entitled to 43 commercial properties, 11 residential complexes, development rights across 6 states, multiple financial accounts, and he paused here with the weight of someone who understood what he was saying. The Atlanta residential property on which she currently resided. Total appraised value of the full estate, $28 billion. He said it simply, the way figures that large must be said, because anything else makes them sound unreal. Zara sat down on the utility room floor. She held the pendant in her palm. She did not cry for her father at that moment. The grief was already inside her from the first call she hadn't answered, already moving through her quietly. She sat and she breathed and she thought about his voice, about the porch, about the evening light, about the way he sat with her without needing to fill the silence. She thought about what he had said the morning she left. She closed her fingers around the pendant, pressed it against her chest, and when she finally spoke into the phone, her voice was steady and clear. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. Those 2 weeks she was a woman who had stopped moving against the current and started moving with her own intention instead. She did not plan revenge. She planned clarity. And clarity in the hands of a patient woman is the most powerful force in the world. She met with Mr. Thornton and his associates remotely. She signed what needed to be signed. She reviewed every document, every deed, every account balance, and she came to understand, in full, the scale of what her father had built and what it meant that it was now hers. She moved through those 2 weeks without changing a single thing about her behavior in the house. And nobody noticed anything different because they had already stopped looking at her carefully. They saw what they wanted to see. They always had. Jakari had always loved a gathering. He enjoyed the energy of a full room, the sense of being at the center of something significant. So when he announced a celebration at the mansion, business contacts, family, friends, neighbors, a loosely defined tribute to what he called his new chapter, the house went into preparation mode with a cheerfulness that nobody questioned. Renee oversaw the arrangements with the confidence of a woman who had decided the role was already permanent. Claudette approved the menu. Darius and Kezia spread the word. The invitations went out for a Saturday evening. Zara made no preparations. She said nothing about attending. Saturday evening came. The mansion filled. The chandelier did what it always did, threw light in every direction with an excess that felt celebratory. Marcus stood at the center of the room with Renee on his arm, dressed in deep burgundy, performing the role with the ease of someone who had stopped feeling guilty about the performance. Claudette moved through the guests with the bearing of a woman presiding over something she had built. Darius laughed loudly near the bar. Kezia accepted compliments near the window. Zara arrived 20 minutes after the gathering started. She came through the front door without announcement, without fanfare, without the kind of entrance that calls attention to itself and knows it is calling attention. She wore a structured cream dress, natural hair pulled clean and simple from her face, the gold pendant resting against her collarbone where it always rested. She walked the way a person walks when they are not performing, just moving through space they are comfortable in at a pace that does not ask for permission. The room noticed, not all at once, in a wave. First the people nearest the door, then outward, until glasses were lowering and heads were turning. Something in the quality of her stillness recalibrating the room's understanding of itself. Without anyone quite knowing why, Marcus saw her from across the space. His expression moved through surprise and then tightened into something between irritation and unease. Claudette's chin lifted. Renee's eyes fixed on Zara with an alertness she tried to make look like indifference and didn't quite achieve. Mr. Thornton came through the front door 30 seconds behind her, a trim man in a dark suit carrying a slim leather folder. Two associates moving quietly alongside him. He crossed the room without acknowledging the gathered guests and came to stand a few steps behind Zara's right shoulder. Renee moved first. She crossed the room with the confidence of a woman who had decided weeks ago that Zara had no standing here. She stopped at a distance close enough to make the exchange public. "Nobody invited you dressed like that," she said. She expected a flinch. Zara looked at her with a steadiness that was more disorienting than any anger. "I don't need an invitation to my own property," she said. Marcus crossed the room, voice pitched for composure. "Zara, this isn't the time, mister." Thornton opened the leather folder. He walked to the center table and laid the documents out on a clean row, notarized, stamped, clear. He spoke in the measured tone of a man who understood that precision was a form of mercy, because anything imprecise gives room for argument. An argument is only a way of postponing what is already true. The Atlanta residential property, all 47,000 square feet, all outbuildings, all adjoining land, had been registered in Zara's name since the date of her marriage to Marcus. This was executed as a protective transfer by her father, Cornelius, 1 week following the wedding ceremony. The full estate inheritance, comprising 43 commercial properties, 11 residential complexes, development rights across 6 states, and all associated financial accounts. Total appraised value $28 billion had been formally released into Zara's soul. Possession 6 days ago upon the settlement of her father's estate. The room did not make a sound. Claudette's wine glass stopped halfway between the table and her mouth and stayed there. Dryas looked at the floor with the expression of a man recalculating everything quickly and finding the numbers do not balance. Kezia had backed up the steps without appearing to notice she was moving. Renee looked at Marcus with a sharpness that had nothing left of composure in it. Marcus looked at Zara. He looked at her the way people look when a face they thought they knew has become, in one instant, someone they have never seen before. Zara did not raise her voice. She let the silence settle, then looked at Marcus calmly. "You handed me a mop in my own house," she said. "I used it. Now I'm asking you to leave." She placed the deed back on the table and walked out, the chandelier light catching her pendant as the door closed behind her. Marcus soon learned how little he actually owned. Not the house, not the accounts, not the life he had assumed was shared. Within days, business contacts pulled back, calls slowed, and invitations disappeared. Renee left without a word. Even Claudette received formal notice that the property belonged solely to Zara. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood alone at the gate asking to see her. The answer was simple. She was unavailable. The gate remained closed. 6 months later, Zara sat on her father's porch in Houston, managing the estate with quiet focus. Beside her rested a wooden box holding her pendant and a letter he had never sent. "You will know when it's time." She finally did. She had not won by fighting loudly, but by staying exactly who she was.